You know, I wondered if, in talking about these institutionalizing the opportunity for dissent, right? So for the devil's advocate type role. Do you find that, well, first of all, you did have some companies that seem to exemplify this, right? So if you could describe exactly maybe some of the procedures or approaches.
One example we talk about in the book is IBM in the earlier days with Thomas Watson Jr. When Thomas Watson Jr. took over IBM from his father, he had a very centralized organization. Basically, Watson Sr. ran the company with about 30 reports and made all the decisions. Watson Jr. came in and said, this is crazy. You know, I don't want to work this way, and also it doesn't allow us to innovate and grow. So he instituted a process which was known as the IBM contention system, where basically at every level, the line manager could make a decision, but in order to make that decision, he had to get a staff person who was assigned to him to agree. And the two of them would argue it out, and if they couldn't agree, they would kick it up. Mm-hmm. But if they kicked it up, it would be frowned upon, mm-hmm. right? So this actually worked out, and Watson had some interesting things in there where you know, if they made some mistakes, he would flip their roles. The staff person would get the line role, and the line person would get the staff role. But that allowed for this decentralized and quick decision making, because Watson said the worst thing to do is not to make any decision. Right. And you know, for about 20 years after that, I think it was Fortune that named him the capitalist of the century, and IBM was the most profitable company in the world.
Right. I wonder if it's interesting because you said earlier that the companies that have had the most success tend to be the ones that maybe have kind of too much groupthink. So yeah. It's in a way counterintuitive that you had an IBM that was dominant and yet was testing itself all the time.
Yeah,
or maybe it wasn't dominant at the beginning necessarily.
Well, the theory is that really successful companies are the ones that have optimized itself for its competitive environment, right? So there's sort of a corporate evolution that goes on in which they learn over time how to compete. And within the bounds of their environment, they're the best competitors. The problem is that both from an organizational and a psychological standpoint, they tend not to see when they've moved outside of the environment which they've optimized themselves mm-hmm. for. Right. And that's how really good companies fall.
Well, and this maybe it's related to one of the audience questions here. Given the evidence that shows acquisitions typically destroy value rather than create it, why do companies keep doing them? I mean, obviously for many reasons, but why do you think?
Because we're always different. You know, this one we'll do differently. Mm-hmm. We'll learn from our mistakes. You know, I think it's a very complex thing. I think in this case, Wall Street is part of the problem, mm-hmm. right? Because we push for that kind of growth. I think we tend to be mesmerized by good stories. Yeah. And it's very easy to tell a good story around a big deal. And we don't force ourselves to go through the hurdle of asking those tough questions.
Right. Forgive me for forgetting the name of the company, but that you go through in detail that the iron ore trading company, mm-hmm. which from 19th century had a pretty good but boring business, and then kind of tried to transform itself through divestitures and acquisitions and things like that. I mean, it seems to me many acquisitions, or at least many bad acquisitions, come out of that. Let's buy our way out of a pretty lousy business.
Yeah, it is actually one of it's Ogilvy Norton, centuries-old Cleveland based company who had the distinction of having John D. Rockefeller as an accountant at one point early in his career. They were facing an issue where the steel industry was in the tank, mm-hmm. And they basically said, let's get out of it, and we'll jump into, in their case, limestone, mm-hmm. Of all things. And they knew the steel industry really well to know all the problems of it, and didn't know the limestone industry well enough to know the problems associated with it. So it looked better. And this is actually one of the red flags for most adjacency moves, which is that you're really making a move out of desperation, right. which colors your judgment as opposed to opportunity.
Well, this kind of gets to that as well. Related to the devil's advocate role within the M&A, with the M&A space heating up again and deals starting to look good to management, what are the key questions to ask to challenge management to look past what looks good on paper and therefore make a good decision?
Well, there are a number of red flags that tend to come up with synergy plays. One is that we tend to underestimate the complexity of integration. Another is that we overestimate the power we bring to the deal. The one that probably is the most egregious is that we tend to overestimate our hold on customers, right? So we think that our customers will come along with us and basically accept the power of the deal, and oftentimes customers say, that's nice, but I'm not interested.
It seems like a failure of also static analysis. In other words, you're not anticipating what competitors are going to do in response to a deal.
Yeah, but I think one of the most important things to think about is what you do before a deal's on the table. Right? If you wait until there's some exciting deal that's near completion, it's probably too late to raise the question. I think this is actually a very interesting time because it's a relatively quiet time where essentially we can have a conversation about the conversation that we're going to have. Right. We can look at the mechanisms, the deal mechanisms. We can look at the deliberation mechanism. We can start talking about, okay, what is our plan for how we assess our portfolio? What's our plan for how we tell the story? What's our plan for how we look at those deliberations as we go? Mm-hmm. And one of the things we're hoping is that this book and all the data behind it is license for that conversation. Right? Since if there's nothing on the table now, you can go back and say, look at this research. What do we think about this research? Given that we're in a cold analytical state, can we have some deliberation? And one of the things that I think that's the most important is to put some safety net around the process, so that you force before there's actually a deal on the table, you come to an agreement that you're going to have a certain kind of analysis.
Mm-hmm. I mean, something you said earlier really kind of resonates with me coming from Barron's, which is the price matters tremendously.
Oh, yeah.
The price, the level of investment, whatever the strategic decision is. I mean, we let companies, great companies that are doing the right thing, we let them sit forever without kind of commenting favorably on them because we just can't get comfortable with the price and that sort of thing. So, that goes to another question here, the whole winner's curse of paying too much for a deal, right? Conceptually could work, but
it can fall apart on price, because if you overpay, then you have to get the returns that much faster. Your ability to invest is less. It just makes the thing all that much more rickety. And of course, we tend to overpay, right? So if you want to buy a company and you do it based upon synergies there, well, the guys who are selling want some of that synergy, right? Or you're asking the other management basically to give up their jobs. So, they want something for that. So we tend to overpay, and then once you get into a situation also where you're a bidding situation, we tend to overpay. So, one of the things that's always recommended in auto literature is you have to know your walkway price.
Right.
Unfortunately, we tend not to stick to it.
Right. Exactly. The analogy that also struck me is funny. The Larry Summers quote was just from this week, right?
Yeah.
In a story about, and the presentation of that story about the debate among Obama's economic team, I think in general was, wow, these guys don't have it figured out. Maybe we haven't, maybe they're not all on the same page.
Right.
Which is ironic in the sense that when the administration was putting together just its general team, everyone was talking about the Doris Kearns Goodwin book, Team of Rivals, right? So it was Lincoln's cabinet was, really at odds for much of his administration's, and yet it's considered to be this brilliant stroke. So what it says to me is when the process is ongoing, it seems uncomfortable. It seems like we're not working right.
Right.
But I guess in the end, you have to institute.
Yeah, nobody wants a messy process. It's uncomfortable. You want to get into the room and feel like you're all part of the team. You've agreed on something and you can march forth together. And that feels good in the short term, but it always hurts in the bad term. It's interesting. I don't want to get into politics here, but there's an interesting story about David Brooks, the New York Times columnist. I think everybody would agree. I mean, he would say he's a Republican. He said that a couple of years ago before the election that one of the biggest problems with the Bush administration, in his view, was that none of the people around the president would ever challenge him, would never argue with him. And that as a result, they had a second-rate decision-making process because they never really understood decisions all that well. Now, he blamed it on the people around him. Brooks blamed it on the people around Bush. My view is that if the leader surrounds himself with people who won't challenge him, then It's the leader's problem.
Right.